Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to impartially break down a genuinely fascinating and very specific spiritual text to understand its unique metaphysical framework. We're looking at a text from the religious movement Happy Science, and specifically we're focusing on an entity known as Ra-Mu, the supposed king of a super ancient civilization. Now, whether you're totally familiar with metaphysical texts or completely new to this kind of literature, our goal today is to neutrally map out the internal logic, the terminology, and the profound philosophical challenges this source presents. We're going to rely entirely on the material itself, examining exactly how it structures its universe. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our agenda for today. First, we'll define the Rajan phenomenon. Second, we'll meet the creator, Ra-Mu. Third, we'll explore the ancient Mu civilization. Fourth, we'll look at the warnings against modern materialism. And finally, we'll discuss shattering the collective illusion.
Section 1. Defining the Rajan phenomenon.
So before we get into the heavy stuff, pose this fundamental question to yourself. What exactly is a spiritual message in the context of this specific book? I mean, how does the author claim to be receiving all this information? The material is actually highly meticulous about defining its methodology, distinguishing it from things you might have seen in popular culture or other spiritual traditions. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clinical the source is in defining its terms. It explicitly outlines the Rajan phenomenon as the act of speaking the words of a spiritual being from the other world. But it emphasizes that this is absolutely not random channeling. Rather, it's a highly specific process, reserved only for those who have reached an advanced state of enlightenment. So the crucial point here is the strict contrast the text draws between a Rajan channeler and a typical trance medium. In a standard mediumship phenomenon, the medium falls into an unconscious trance state, they lose awareness, and the spirit just speaks one-sidedly. But the Rajan phenomenon? It's entirely different. The channeler remains fully conscious. Even more fascinating is the mechanical explanation of how foreign spirits communicate. When a foreign spirit speaks, the enlightened channeler actually utilizes their own brain's language centers to select the necessary words, actively translating the spiritual message into Japanese in real time. It's presented as a highly cognitive, conscious, and enlightened linguistic bridge. Section 2, Meet the Creator, Ra-Mu. According to the preface, this particular spiritual message is a huge milestone. Recorded publicly on February 16, 2018, it marked roughly the 800th public spiritual message conducted by the organization. But what really sets this apart is the entity itself. The text states that Ra-Mu revealed a terrifying, awe-inspiring aspect of God, clearly declaring himself to be the creator. This massive scale of divinity differs greatly from traditional Japanese sect founder-level Buddhism. It pitches the entity as a supreme cosmic architect rather than just a historical philosopher. But how does a modern reader even approach a work making a claim that massive? Well, a strict prerequisite is outlined right at the beginning. The source strongly suggests that humans have historically developed religions merely to save themselves. But encountering this awe-inspiring aspect of God requires something way more intense. It insists that without completely emptying one's heart, the door to ultimate truth simply will not open. It essentially demands a total suspension of your preconceived beliefs. Moving on to Section 3, the super ancient Mu civilization. And this brilliantly illustrates the visual scale of the Mu Empire as described in the text. We're talking glowing pyramids set against lush tropical landscapes with brilliant solar flares. It presents a legendary civilization in the South Pacific where deep spiritual mystery and highly advanced science were perfectly fused together. It frames Mu as a society that actually surpasses our own 21st century capabilities. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this claim, we have to look at the timeline. It is boldly asserted that this super ancient civilization existed a staggering 17,000 years ago. Think about that. This pushes the boundaries of conventional history far, far into the deep past, setting the stage for a society that rose to incredible heights before ultimately falling. And the achievements attributed to Mu by the source material are incredibly specific. It wasn't just some primitive society. Highly advanced solar energy technology is listed, tech that supposedly modern humanity still hasn't fully mastered. Routine interactions with extraterrestrial beings and spacefaring technology, casually mentioned. It also details the secrets of pyramid power and populations of demigods who could freely travel between this physical world and the spiritual realm. It is portrayed as a highly complex, technologically supreme utopia. Section 4. Warnings against modern materialism. Let's see how this builds into a direct critique of our current society. The fall of ancient civilizations like Mu is utilized as a strict parallel to warn about our modern trajectory. Ramu explains that as societies advance, there's this dangerous tipping point. People begin to replace pure faith with worldly desires. Advanced scientific technology, rather than elevating humanity, becomes a tool to satisfy the lust for power. The text details a historical shift where science was twisted to enslave others, ultimately leading to the creation of weapons of mass destruction. It's a really stark warning about a civilization strangling itself through its own technological arrogance. In the epilogue, a really intense philosophical critique is delivered. It is explicitly stated that modern Western-style civilization must profoundly reflect on its pride and self-conceit. The core argument here is that modern humanity is acting with an unearned arrogance, completely ignorant of the fact that civilizations far surpassing our own, like Mu, have existed and been completely wiped out before. The underlying argument the source is making is about the absolute limits of materialism. A purely materialistic worldview, believing that only what we can touch and measure is real, is presented as a total developmental dead end. The text argues that as long as humanity remains trapped in this materialistic framework, we are blind to greater cosmic truths. Overcoming this requires realizing the limits of materialism to regain a pure and transparent heart, stepping away from the endless pursuit of physical and technological accumulation.
Which brings us to Section 5, Shattering the Collective Illusion.
A radical stance on modern knowledge is taken in the final pages. It is neutrally but firmly posited that what modern humans consider common sense is actually just a massive collective illusion. In fact, modern academic consensus and contemporary worldly knowledge are described mostly as trivial garbage when compared to the vast, multidimensional reality of ultimate spiritual truth. The core thesis of the epilogue is perfectly encapsulated in this provocative quote. It literally says, "It is difficult to reach cosmic truths unless the modern wall of collective illusion, common sense, is shattered." The point is, you can't simply add this spiritual knowledge on top of your current worldview. Your current worldview, your common sense, has to be entirely deconstructed first. So what are the specific philosophical action items demanded of modern humanity by this book? First, to actively shatter the illusion of common sense that confines us to a three-dimensional reality. Second, to deeply realize the limits of materialism. Third, to reflect honestly on the pride and self-conceit of modern Western-style civilization. And finally, through that reflection, to regain a pure and transparent heart capable of perceiving these cosmic truths. Which leaves us with a fascinating, highly challenging question derived straight from the heart of the source material. Regardless of your personal beliefs, you're forced to ask, is what you call common sense actually just a collective illusion? Is your certainty in the modern material world the very thing blocking you from seeing a much larger, older, and more profound ultimate truth? It's a really provocative thought experiment on the nature of reality, history, and human pride. Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating piece of source material. It honestly reads a bit like a stage play, blending esoteric spiritualism with some surprisingly relatable human frustration. We're going to look at the literal transcript of a public spiritual channeling event, zeroing in on those opening moments to see exactly what happens when ancient history collides with a modern-day interview.
So, think about this for a second. What actually happens when you wake up an ancient king from a 17,000-year nap? I mean, imagine the absolute deepest sleep of your life, multiply that by millennia, and then suddenly you're pulled into a brightly lit room full of people just waiting to ask you questions. Well, as we're about to see, the answer is pretty simple. You wake up extremely grumpy.
To see how this plays out, we're looking at a published transcript of a public spiritual message. We'll be focusing specifically on Chapter 1, which details the summoning of Ramu. This session was conducted by President Ryuho Okawa, and the whole point was to summon the spirit of this purported great king of the ancient Mu Empire, a super-advanced civilization said to have existed around 17,000 years ago. Now, regardless of your personal take on spiritual channeling, this transcript is just utterly captivating as a piece of documentary literature. It vividly captures this awkward, tense, and honestly kind of hilarious interaction between the interviewer and this ancient entity.
What makes this really interesting is the sheer scale of the operation leading up to this exact moment. Right at the beginning of the chapter, the text outlines that this specific channeling of the Mu Empire's great king was recorded as Ryuho Okawa's monumental 777th public spiritual message. So for the organizers, this is a massive milestone, right? It's highly anticipated. They're absolutely expecting a profound, enlightening dialogue to mark the occasion. But as you'll see, the guest of honor had completely different feelings about the schedule.
Before the summoning even officially kicks off, the transcript notes this very revealing disclaimer from Okawa. He openly tells the audience, hey, he might be in a bad mood. He explains that for someone of this ancient, massive stature, preparing the physical and spiritual conditions for communication just isn't a simple matter. He even hints that maybe a lighter, more casual setting would have been better, implying that they're basically trying to force this incredibly heavy, ancient presence into a standard recording session. It perfectly sets the stage. The audience is essentially warned, buckle up, because this spirit does not want to be here.
And man, he was not kidding. When the spirit of Ramu enters the host, we don't get some grand, booming greeting. The literal stage directions written into the transcript paint a picture of sheer awkwardness. First, the host starts rubbing his hands together, murmuring, Then, a documented 15 seconds of total unbroken silence. Just think about that. 15 seconds is a literal eternity when you're sitting in front of a live audience. Then, while he's still rubbing his hands, a heavy sigh, followed by another 5 seconds of complete silence. The transcript portrays this profound, heavy reluctance. The interviewer finally tries to break the ice with a simple, good morning, but the heavy sighs, they just keep coming. So the interviewer, who is clearly desperate to get the conversation moving, tries a super respectful approach. He brings up a previous book discussing Rama's past teachings on the Mu continent, hoping to flatter the king a bit and get him talking. And Ramu's response? It is brutally blunt. He essentially just goes, sure, I probably taught things back then, but so what? What does that have to do with you? It is a hilariously cold shutdown. The interviewer is trying to have this reverent theological discussion, and the ancient king is treating him like a telemarketer who just interrupted his dinner. Okay, so polite flattery? Total dead end. You can practically feel the tension in the room through the page. Finally, realizing he just has to address the giant elephant in the room, the interviewer drops all the formalities and goes straight for the most direct question possible. Why the bad mood? And this brings us to the absolute crux of the conflict. The ancient king finally airs his, honestly, deeply relatable grievance. According to the text, he complains that calling out to someone who's been sleeping for 17,000 years just to have a little chat is basically a bad trick. From his perspective, they didn't respectfully summon an ancient ruler, they just rudely woke a guy up on a whim. The sheer absurdity of applying everyday human irritability, that feeling of having your alarm clock go off way too early to a 17,000-year timeline, is exactly what makes this source material so incredibly fun to read. He goes on to elaborate on this frustration, and he lays out his expectations pretty clearly. He tells the interviewer point blank, you need a grand ceremony to summon me. Basically, for a great king of an advanced ancient empire, you don't just sit in a chair and say hello. You need pomp, you need circumstance, you need a massive formal ritual. You definitely don't just casually ring the doorbell of a deity-level figure. The transcript perfectly captures this massive clash of expectations, modern convenience versus ancient imperial protocol. Eventually, the session does conclude, and at the very end of the chapter, Okawa offers this post-session reflection that perfectly wraps up the whole ordeal. He notes, he entered in a bad mood, and even though he spoke a little after that, he really is a difficult one. It's just this incredibly honest, almost exhausted admission. It shows that even for an experienced spiritual group on their 777th session, dealing with an ancient king who missed out on his grand ceremony is a genuinely tough day at the office. Which brings us to our final thought for today. Whether you're reading this transcript as a spiritual event or just a really captivating piece of literature, it holds up this brilliant mirror to human nature. It reminds us that wanting a little respect and the simple desire to not be woken up abruptly are apparently universal even across 17 millennia. So I'll leave you with this. If you were an ancient king, peacefully resting for 17,000 years, and someone suddenly yanked you into the 21st century, what kind of grand ceremony would you demand before you agreed to answer a single question? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the fascinating texts around us.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into a seriously fascinating piece of spiritual literature. We're going to explore an explainer covering an interview with none other than Ra Mu, the legendary ruler of the lost continent of Mu. Now, normally, when you think of ancient divine kings, you probably imagine a booming voice from the heavens, right? Handing down ancient wisdom with absolute clarity. But the personality that actually emerges from this source material, it's highly unexpected. He's remarkably cynical and at first completely reluctant to open up or reveal his true feelings. We're going to break down his exact words, his absolutely astonishing claims, and the highly advanced civilization he says he ruled. It's a really deep dive into an entity who plays his cards incredibly close to the chest, before finally revealing the staggering scope of his past. Just to immediately give you a sense of this guy's unique vibe, check out this quote. So the interviewer tries to butter him up, right? Mentioning his immense popularity and the grand legacy attached to his name. And Ramu just flat out rejects the compliment. He literally compares himself to an unsold DVD or a CD just sitting in an antique shop. And he jokes, pretty cynically, that the garbage truck is going to come for him soon. It's such a bizarrely self-deprecating complaint to hear from an ancient god king. It completely shatters that majestic image we usually expect. But this isn't just him making a weird pop culture reference. It reveals a really defensive posture. By using these modern, self-deprecating consumer metaphors, he's actively dodging the massive expectations being placed on him. It totally sets the tone for the interview. Getting to the truth here is definitely going to require some serious persistence.
Section 1. The unexpected persona. The depth of this reluctance gets even more obvious when the topic turns to modern media. The interviewer brings up the animated movie The Laws of the Sun, which actually features these grand cinematic depictions of the Mu civilization and Ra Mu himself. Now, you'd think a forgotten historical figure would be thrilled by a big-budget movie resurrecting his legacy, right? Instead, he remarkably and bluntly dismisses it. His exact word in Japanese is chachi, which translates to cheap or shabby. This is a super crucial moment in the text. He's not easily impressed, and he completely refuses to validate modern interpretations of his life. This blunt rejection isn't just him being difficult, though. It's a calculated reluctance. He doesn't easily reveal his true intentions, kind of masking his deeper spiritual identity behind this wall of unimpressed criticism. But despite all this evasiveness, the text actually shows this really fascinating cat-and-mouse dynamic. Ramu insists, "It's not that I'm in a bad mood," even though his answers remain incredibly short, guarded, and honestly pretty uncooperative throughout the beginning of the chapter. But the interrogator? They absolutely refuse to back down. They keep pressing with pointed questions. The interviewer is clearly aware that this grumpy, reluctant facade is deliberately hiding immense secrets. And the tension in the text really builds, because you know that if this shell can just be cracked, a monumental truth about his identity and the ancient history of the world is waiting right there to be uncovered. Section 2. The Divine Connection. Okay, so to really understand the monumental stakes of what the interviewer is trying to uncover, we have to define a core concept first. In the context of this specific spiritual literature, El Cantare is defined as the supreme being. We're talking the overarching creator god of the earth and the ultimate source of spiritual light. So this isn't just some minor deity or a local nature spirit. This entity represents literally the highest possible echelon of the spiritual hierarchy. Understanding El Cantare is absolutely essential to grasping the sheer gravity of the framework we're examining today, because the conversation is about to shift from mundane complaints about DVDs to the literal architecture of creation. And here's the payoff. When he's finally pressed beyond his evasive defenses, Ramu drops an absolute bombshell that completely recontextualizes everything. He states, "I am close to the main body of El Cantare. We are the same person." Wow. The text is asserting that Ramu isn't merely a former Wordle king who ruled a long time ago. He's being presented as a direct extension, a core part of the soul of the supreme creator god himself. The contrast here is just absolutely fascinating. Think about it. Just moments ago, we were listening to an entity comparing himself to garbage left in an antique shop, totally dismissing his own legacy. And now he casually claims to be a localized manifestation of God on Earth. It perfectly highlights exactly why he was so reluctant to open up initially. The truth of his identity is just almost too massive to easily articulate.
Section 3. Mapping the Lost Worlds. So, from his divine identity in the spiritual realm, the text then takes a step down to physical geography. The source material actually plots out the purported location of the Mu continent. And I mean, the sheer scale of it is breathtaking. Notice the vast dotted borders situated right squarely in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This isn't just a small island, it's a massive landmass bridging the incredibly vast space between modern-day Japan, the Americas, and Australia. The text is describing an empire of unprecedented size, dominating the world's largest ocean tens of thousands of years ago. It completely rewrites the standard geographical history of the planet.
Furthermore, the source explicitly clears up a really common geographical and historical confusion. While Mu dominated the vast expanse of the Pacific, the text sharply differentiates it from another legendary lost land, Lemuria. As detailed in the geographic layout provided, Lemuria is placed much further south, spanning the Indian Ocean between the eastern coast of Africa and the Indian subcontinent. During the interview, Ramu makes it very clear that these were completely distinct places, with distinct cultures and timelines, and he insists that modern esoteric traditions often incorrectly mix them up. Section 4, Debunking the Primitive Myth. Now, this massive geographic footprint leads us straight into a major point of contention regarding human history. When the interviewer tries to trace the lineage of the Mu civilization to the ancient Japanese Jomon and Yayoi periods, Ramu becomes incredibly dismissive. Just to give some context for those who might be unfamiliar with Japanese archaeology, the Jomon period dates back to around 14,000 BCE, and it's characterized by early hunter-gatherer lifestyles and distinct cord-marked clay pottery. The subsequent Yayoi period brought the beginnings of wet rice farming and simple metallurgy. Modern history views these as the foundational, albeit primitive, roots of civilization in the region. But Ramu? He vehemently rejects this association. He insists that his era, despite supposedly existing far earlier than the Jomon period, was a highly advanced, vastly superior civilization. To him, comparing his empire to early humans making clay pots is a profound misunderstanding of history. His exact quote on the matter is incredibly striking, and it really brings back that cynical, exasperated personality we saw at the beginning. He says, "It's embarrassing to say civilization dawned with just hardening and baking clay. Give me a break." You can really hear how deeply offended he is by modern humanity's underestimation of his era. And this connects perfectly back to him calling his movie depiction cheap. He feels fundamentally insulted by the assumption that the further back in time you go, the more primitive humanity must have been. He flat out refuses to accept that his people were simple primitives playing with mud, asserting instead that humanity has forgotten a towering pinnacle of technological achievement. So if they weren't baking clay and hunting with stone tools, what exactly were they doing? Well, the text describes a breathtaking alternative, an empire powered entirely by advanced technology. Specifically, their use of pyramid power. The Mu civilization purportedly utilized a massive central pyramid that acted as a colossal generator to absorb and amplify solar energy. And get this, that energy was then wirelessly transmitted and distributed to smaller pyramids situated on top of individual homes all across the continent. It is this incredible vision of a highly advanced, harmonious, and entirely clean energy society that existed long before recorded history, operating on principles of physics and spiritual energy that modern science has yet to even comprehend. Section 5. The Fading Memory of a God.
But here is the catch. Despite claiming an identity intimately linked to the supreme creator of the Earth, and despite describing an incredibly advanced, continent-spanning, solar-powered empire, Ramu makes a truly shocking admission near the end of the text. He states, "My memory is fading. It's like I have Alzheimer's. Soon I will have no memory at all." This is an incredibly stark contrast to his grand past and his divine status. It introduces this profound existential dread to the narrative. It's almost like a cosmic Alzheimer's. He notes that as deep time stretches on, even the spiritual records and memories of the physical world dissolve into the ether. The entity that supposedly built the greatest civilization on Earth is slowly, inevitably, forgetting it ever even happened.
And that leaves us with a deeply provocative thought. If a channel's entity, one described as a creator god who ruled a continent-spanning high-tech empire, claims that his own memories are slipping away into the void, how do we ever truly reconstruct the history of these lost civilizations? If the spiritual archives themselves are subject to decay, the past might be far more fragile than we ever imagined. It is a fascinating intersection of myth, spiritual channeling, and the ultimate fragility of history itself. Definitely something to think about. Until next time.
All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a really unique text that claims to channel the ancient wisdom of a legendary ruler from a lost continent. Now, whether you view this as esoteric philosophy, speculative history, or just a captivating thought experiment, the concepts presented here offer a surprisingly practical approach to life. We're going to explore the supposed ancient civilization of Mu, and specifically, we're focusing on the fascinating intersection of their incredibly advanced technology and their profound mastery of the human mind.
The source material we're digging into today is a book titled The True Heart of Ramu, which reveals the spiritual and technological secrets of Ramu, the great king of the ancient Mu civilization. The text frames this culture, which supposedly existed 17,000 years ago, not as a primitive society of hunter-gatherers, but as a deeply sophisticated civilization where mysterious spiritual power and hard scientific principles were just seamlessly blended together.
But before we get to the heavy, esoteric concepts, the text actually offers a pretty surprising moment of humor. The channeled spirit of Ra-Mu laments that his revered name is now used so casually in modern times. He jokes that Ra-Mu sounds like the name of a ramen shop, or that it reminds people of Ryu, which is Japanese chili oil. It's a great little icebreaker in the source material, honestly. It immediately grounds this grand, mythic figure, showing us a really relatable personality before we dive into his heavier teachings.
So, to help us digest all of this, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The legend of Ra-Mu. 2. Mu's pyramid power. 3. The 3 right paths. And finally, 4. The essence of meditation.
Okay, Section 1. The Legend of Ra-Mu. The source material describes a society that would honestly make our modern tech hubs look kind of underdeveloped. It paints a picture of a civilization where highly advanced technology and deep esoteric spirituality were not at odds with one another, like at all. They were completely fused together under Ra-Mu's guidance. Imagine a world where the leading theoretical physicists are also the leading spiritual monks. That is the baseline paradigm of the Mu civilization as described in this text.
Moving right along to Section 2, Mu's pyramid power.
What's absolutely wild about their everyday technology is how their solar pyramids essentially functioned like giant lenses. The text describes massive central pyramids in the cities that would absorb and amplify the sun's energy, and then emit a massive radiant beam of light straight across the landscape. So according to these claims, these weren't just stone tombs. They were active, highly functional power plants utilizing this incredible lens-like technology to harness solar power on a massive scale.
Think about the logistics of this for a second. The text claims that this centralized energy from the massive city pyramid was then beamed and distributed to smaller pyramids situated on individual family homes. Basically, it was an entirely clean, wireless energy grid. But what's crucial here is that this energy wasn't just viewed as a mundane utility, like how we view our electricity. It was deeply revered by the citizens as something holy, literally a direct blessing from the cosmos.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 3 right paths. Here is where we make our crucial pivot. Despite having this incredible, seemingly limitless technology, Ra-Mu's society ultimately prioritized the teachings of the mind. He taught his people a very specific philosophy of emulation. Basically, he told them to emulate the very sun that powered their pyramids. Just as the sun freely gives its light and warmth without asking for absolutely anything in return, the people were instructed to project love and mercy outward to all. The physical technology of the solar pyramids was perfectly mirrored by the spiritual technology of human compassion.
So how do you actually distill that grand, lofty theology into something you can use on a random Tuesday, right? Well, they had a daily, actionable framework called the 3 right paths. It's basically a simple 3-step mental checklist for everyday life. Number 1, did you give love to others today? Number 2, did you engage in self-reflection and examine your own heart? And number 3, what did you learn today to further your soul's progress? It's just a beautifully simple feedback loop for personal growth.
I absolutely love the practical reasoning behind this teaching. The text asserts that Ra-Mu intentionally kept these rules incredibly brief because he fundamentally understood human nature. He notes that 3 points are basically the limit of everyday human memory. I mean, if you give people 8, 10, or 100 complex religious laws, they're just going to forget them, or they'll obsess over the minutiae. By keeping it to 3 core paths, everyday application actually became possible for every single citizen. Practical action was deemed way more important than memorizing endless dogma.
Finally, let's look at Section 4, the essence of meditation. So, once you master those daily paths, you're ready for their most advanced practice. According to the text, modern humanity suffers from a major misconception. We tend to think that meditation or prayer is about communicating with things outside of us, looking up at the sky, trying to contact external deities or aliens. But Ra-Mu teaches the exact opposite. He states that the true door to the cosmos, the ultimate connection to higher intelligence, is actually found by opening a door deep within your own consciousness. You don't look out, you look in.
The source material explains that diving into one's own mind and finding that absolute stillness is literally the only true way to connect with high-dimensional cosmic wisdom. The practitioner becomes completely grounded, closing their eyes to the external world so that the entire journey happens internally.
To explain how this internal journey actually works, the text uses a really brilliant metaphor. It describes the human mind as an onion structure that's composed of many dimensional layers. The 3D physical body, the reality you and I experience every day, is just the outermost skin of this onion. As you meditate, you start peeling back the 4th dimension, then the 5th, the 9th, going incredibly deep. The source material claims this inner structure extends up to the 20th dimension and beyond, serving as a direct conduit to universal truths.
But as you can probably guess, peeling that cosmic onion is not exactly easy. The narrator in the text notes that to actually traverse these layers and reach the ultimate wisdom at the core, you have to systematically quiet the distracting noises of everyday physical life. They use the term zatsunen, which translates to idle, worldly thoughts or just mental clutter. The advanced spiritual technology of Mu was simply the rigorous, disciplined removal of this mental clutter until only the quiet, universal center remained.
As we wrap up this explainer on the teachings of Ramu today, it leaves us with a really profound paradigm shift to consider. We so often look to advanced technology, or we look out into the stars hoping to find answers or salvation. But the supposed wisdom of this highly advanced ancient civilization tells us that the greatest technology in the entire universe is human consciousness itself. So the question the text ultimately leaves us with is this: instead of looking outward for answers, are you ready to open the door within yourself?
Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are looking at some absolutely wild and fascinating source material. We're going to completely unpack the esoteric channeled dialogues from Ryuho Okawa's writings about the ancient, legendary continent of Mu. Now, whether you're a longtime student of spiritual texts, or maybe you're just kind of curious about alternative history, we're going to map out these incredible claims together to see what cosmic secrets are actually hidden inside. It's going to be a wild ride, for sure, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this explosive question straight from Chapter 4 of our source text. It's a premise that literally upends our entire traditional historical timeline. Look, we're not just talking about ancient people running around with primitive stone tools here. The text actually asks us to consider a scenario where a highly advanced civilization, we're talking 17,000 years ago, possessed the capacity for total, absolute annihilation. It brings up this incredibly haunting idea, right? What if the existential threats we face today are actually just ancient history repeating itself?
To really wrap our heads around this, we need to look closely at our source, a text called The True Heart of Lamu. The whole narrative here is framed as a spiritual reading, essentially a channeled dialogue with the consciousness of Lamu, who was the grand king of this ancient empire. According to this text, the Mu civilization wasn't just some lost island out in the ocean. It was this highly advanced melting pot, and I mean a cosmic melting pot. We're talking heavy, direct extraterrestrial intervention, a complete fusion of mystery and science that, allegedly, completely surpasses even our own 21st century capabilities.
So that brings us to the first major mystery the text tries to unravel, the very real suspicion of ancient weapons of mass destruction. The dialogue in Chapter 4 confronts the idea that the devastating conflicts on Earth during the Mu era might have actually been fought with technologies terrifyingly similar to our modern nuclear arsenals. It's a concept that completely forces us to reevaluate the sheer scale of destruction that was possible in ancient times. Well, at least according to this specific esoteric framework.
You know, during the channeled session, the interviewer actually presses this issue directly. They ask point blank, did things like nuclear wars happen? And it's a super relatable human question, right? We are trying to understand this massive ancient lore through the lens of our own modern anxieties. We know from the text that the Mu Empire ultimately collapsed, and the interviewer is just trying to figure out if these earthly conflicts literally ended in nuclear annihilation.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the exact nuance of Lamar's response here. The consciousness replies, "I didn't say nuclear." So he absolutely acknowledges that massive, catastrophic weapons were indeed used, but he specifically rejects the modern terminology of nuclear arms. This tiny linguistic correction in the text is so vital because it completely points the reader away from standard human, earthly inventions and towards something far, far more exotic.
Which begs the question, if they weren't our standard nuclear weapons, what exactly were they? Here, the source transitions us from earthly weapons straight into extraterrestrial technology. The text reveals that the Mu civilization was essentially powered by highly advanced alien tech. These conflicts weren't fought with rudimentary human inventions. No, they were fought with incredibly sophisticated systems brought directly to Earth by beings from entirely different star systems. It's a real game changer that completely shifts the scale of the civilization we are picturing.
I mean, just take a look at the level of technology the text is describing here. We're talking about massive solar energy amplification systems, literally capturing and magnifying the sun's power in ways far beyond what we can do today. They had advanced gas-powered airships running on lighter-than-air synthesized gases, and, perhaps most incredibly, the text mentioned supersonic flying saucers that acted almost like personal vehicles, basically cosmic taxis. It describes these extraterrestrials detaching from massive motherships and descending in these smaller craft. It is this vivid, highly detailed sci-fi landscape, but it's presented to us as ancient history. But here's the catch. Having all this highly advanced sci-fi technology doesn't guarantee a utopia. Actually, the text shifts our focus to the real climax of this narrative, the true root cause of Munka's societal collapse. With all this incredible technology at their fingertips, what actually brought the empire down? While the reading insists that the ultimate weapon wasn't the hardware itself, it was the software of the human, or in this case, alien heart.
So, the crucial point is what Lemieux explains next. He states that in most cases, the ultimate settlement of earthly disputes was driven by sheer, unadulterated hatred. The text argues that animosity and spiritual degradation acted as the exact equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It was mutual destruction, totally fueled by negative emotions. They had the advanced tech, sure, but their spiritual immaturity and deeply rooted grudges led to a complete, devastating collapse, where both sides were just entirely wiped out.
But wait, why was there so much deeply rooted hatred and conflict to begin with? Well, this is where the source introduces a massive cosmic twist. The entities fighting these wars, the very souls inhabiting the Mu Empire, weren't even originally from Earth. They were refugees from dying stars. The text explains that Earth essentially served as a sanctuary for various extraterrestrial beings who had literally been forced out of their own galactic homes.
And the source provides an absolutely incredible cosmic roster of these alien refugees. We're talking about souls migrating to Earth from the Pleiades and reptilian systems, both of which, according to the text, had completely collapsed or been destroyed. Then we have beings from Vega, whose companion star was annihilated. Others came seeking refuge from the Magellanic Clouds and the Andromeda Galaxy. Earth wasn't just organically developing its own localized culture, it was actively absorbing the surviving, battered populations of massive galactic-scale catastrophes.
To really grasp the sheer scale of the galactic displacement described in the book, we have to define what these origins actually mean in this context. Beings from places like Vega and the reptilian systems weren't just space explorers out for a joyride, they were asylum seekers. The text explicitly states that space is filled with these constant cycles of invasion, and those who were repeatedly targeted or defeated fled straight to Earth. But, and this is absolutely key here, they didn't just bring their supersonic saucers and fancy solar tech. They brought all their cosmic trauma, their deep defense mechanisms, and their historical, long-standing conflicts right along with them.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because you have to wonder, why allow all these traumatized, technologically advanced cosmic refugees to gather on one single planet? Well, the source reveals a grand purpose behind this whole gathering. It wasn't just some random accident. It was a deliberate spiritual design. Earth was actively chosen to be a testing ground to blend these incredibly diverse cosmic souls together.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core argument of the source. When you look at earthly conflicts alongside these specific alien origins, things start to make sense. The wars of Mu were actually the clash of these diverse extraterrestrial backgrounds. All that unresolved space baggage, that was the true catalyst for the wars on Earth. They were literally fighting out galactic-level resentments on an earthly battlefield.
The text refers to this very deliberate mixing as the Cantare blend. From a massive macro perspective, the Earth's guiding consciousness wanted to see how much of the Pleiades teachings, the Vega teachings, the Magellan teachings, and the Andromeda teachings could actually be integrated together. Mu was essentially a grand spiritual experiment. It was a melting pot specifically designed to forge a new, unified, earthly humanity out of incredibly diverse and conflicting cosmic backgrounds. The destruction? Well, that was just part of the agonizing growing pains of this massive integration process.
Which brings us to a really profound final thought. You see, the text isn't just offering us a wild sci-fi history lesson. It's presenting a very stark warning. If a civilization armed with incredibly advanced technology was utterly destroyed because of deeply rooted hatred and a complete inability to blend their diverse backgrounds, well, are we just repeating the cycle today? As our own modern technology advances exponentially, are we actually addressing the spiritual and emotional maturity required to wield it? Or are we just building shiny new weapons packed with the exact same old cosmic baggage? It's a deeply cautionary parallel from the lore of Mu that gives us a whole lot to ponder about our modern world. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep questioning and keep learning.
All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking some truly wild claims from Chapter 5 of The True Heart of Lamu. We are exploring a pretty dramatic assertion here. The idea that the legendary ancient civilization of Mu was actually powered by extraterrestrial technology. Whether you're deeply familiar with esoteric history or totally new to this specific lore, the sheer scale of these claims is absolutely captivating. So let's see what the material actually says.
We kick things off with a massive paradigm shift directly from the text. The author explicitly challenges the standard textbook narrative that ancient humans were just primitive cavemen wrapped up in animal pelts. In fact, the argument here is the exact opposite. According to this lore, humanity has actually regressed from a much higher point of civilization. The idea is that just because we swapped out animal skins for woven cloth over millennia doesn't actually mean we're more advanced than the people of Mu.
This brilliantly illustrates the core conflict we're dealing with. On one hand, you have the orthodox view. Ancient populations as primitive hunter-gatherers, slowly figuring out fire and chipping away at basic stone tools. But on the flip side, we are asked to visualize Mu as a highly advanced, dynamic, completely tech-driven civilization. To really understand their world, the material demands we completely discard our preconceived notions of the ancient past.
Section 1. Unexpected Agriculture and Food. Now, to understand a civilization, you have to look at how they eat, and the scale of agricultural engineering described here is massive. We're told the people of Mu weren't just out foraging, they had highly developed rice farming and large-scale taro root cultivation. And they didn't just grow it, they processed this taro, powdering and baking it to create long-lasting preserved foods. Plus, and this is huge for a thriving society, they had the chemical know-how to distill these crops into alcohol. It paints a picture of a society with total, practical mastery over its food supply.
Section 2. Airships and Airborne Screens.
Building off that grounded agricultural reality, the lore takes a massive leap straight into the sky. The text introduces us to these enormous, whale-shaped flying ships navigating the ancient horizons, hovering right over sprawling, technologically advanced cities. It just completely shatters that traditional caveman narrative we were talking about earlier.
And what's fascinating is how they allegedly flew. The principles outlined in the text are surprisingly specific. Step 1 involves synthetically generating a gas that is lighter than air. Step 2, they use this gas for buoyancy, but they combine it with the alcohol they distilled from their advanced agriculture, using that as a combustible fuel. And Step 3, utilizing this whole system to conduct intercontinental travel. They were literally flying effortlessly across the globe to other landmasses.
And with the skies conquered for travel, they apparently use them to just kick back and relax, too. The lore introduces this wild concept of airborne movies. So instead of sitting inside a dark theater building like we do today, they supposedly utilized a technology that projected massive, holographic-style screens directly into the night sky, specifically out over the coastlines. I mean, imagine standing on an ancient beach, looking up and watching an enormous movie projection just hovering right there in the clouds.
Okay, so hearing about intercontinental airships and massive holographic sky screens naturally begs a burning question. How could a civilization supposedly existing tens of thousands of years ago possess such futuristic capabilities? How did they just skip the Industrial Revolution and go straight to airborne projections?
Section 3. Alien Technology Exchange.
According to the text, the answer is a deep, profound exchange with extraterrestrials. And this wasn't just them observing ships from afar, it was hands-on, everyday integration. Aliens allegedly arrived in massive motherships and then detached smaller flying saucers that the people of Mu used just like we use private cars or taxis today. Except, these were zipping around at supersonic Mach speeds. Talk about beating ancient traffic.
The sheer breadth of this claimed alien influence is absolutely staggering. Aside from supersonic transport, the lore dives into biology with this wild claim that giant, genetically altered King Kong-like gorillas were deployed in ancient wars. They essentially use them the way a modern army uses a tank. And culturally, they assert that the very roots of human language came directly from the stars. It's an entire societal overhaul based on alien contact.
To give you a really specific example of that cultural influence, the text claims certain kanji characters originated directly from this alien contact. Take the symbol for king. It's a vertical line crossing 3 horizontal lines. The author argues this exact symbol was derived straight from the identification markings painted on the underbellies of the alien discs that were hovering above the people of Mu.
Section 4. The Lesson of Mu.
So, as we wrap up our look at this extraordinary text, we have to look at the broader philosophical takeaway the author is presenting. If a civilization backed by extraterrestrial technology, fully capable of supersonic flight, genetic manipulation, and boundless agricultural abundance could just completely vanish from the face of the Earth, well, what warnings might that hold for our own modern world? If they could fall, despite all their incredible advancements, just how secure is the civilization we've built today? It's definitely a provocative question that the material leaves us to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history you've been taught.
Welcome to today's explainer. We're diving into some seriously mind-bending claims today about the lost continent of Mu. Specifically, we're looking at texts from Chapter 6 of our source material that outline a civilization that didn't just exist, but supposedly possessed scientific technology completely eclipsing what we have right now in the 21st century. We're talking pyramid power generation, amplifying solar rays, weather control, and even satellites beyond the stratosphere. It's wild. Let's look at the sheer scale of what's being claimed here. So think about this. What if the absolute pinnacle of human technology was actually reached 17,000 years ago? It totally flips our normal understanding of history upside down, doesn't it? We kind of just naturally assume progress is a straight line, starting from primitive caves and leading straight to our modern smartphones and rockets. But the texts we're breaking down today propose something entirely different. What if we're actually living in a scientific dark age compared to these ancient engineers?
Here is our agenda for today. First, ancient texts surpassing modern times. 2. The pyramid solar power system. 3. Mu's weather control technology. 4. Satellites and space technology. And finally, a question for modern civilization.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Ancient Tech Surpassing Modern Times.
According to the source, modern civilization is actually considered scientifically regressed. And the reason why is fascinating. It's because, from the perspective of Mu's engineers, we completely fail to utilize pure sunlight. The text points out that even today, we still largely rely on digging things out of the ground and burning them, right? Creating heat and light through destruction. But the civilization of Mu supposedly viewed that as incredibly primitive. Their entire technological foundation was built on extracting, amplifying, and working in total harmony with pure, unadulterated solar rays.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Pyramid Solar Power System.
Now, we're so used to thinking of pyramids as just these massive stone tombs for ancient kings, but the source text claims that in the civilization of Mu, pyramids were actually highly advanced pieces of energy infrastructure. A large central pyramid in a city didn't serve as a monument at all. It acted as a massive receiver. Literally a functioning solar power plant designed to pull energy directly from the sun.
Let's break down exactly how this grid supposedly operated. Step 1. The massive central pyramid absorbs the ambient solar energy. Step 2, and this is where it gets incredibly sci-fi, the pyramid didn't just store that energy, it amplified it. The text explicitly describes a lens function built right into the pyramid structure that magnified the sun's power. And then step 3, this amplified energy was radiated out, essentially beaming power directly to smaller individual pyramids located on the roofs of regular people's homes. It was a completely decentralized wireless power grid.
In this, amplified solar energy was transmitted across vast distances, we're talking kilometers at a time, without the need for a single wire or cable anywhere. The people of Mu allegedly receives all their daily energy needs simply by tapping into this broadcasted ambient solar power. It's just an incredibly elegant solution to power distribution, isn't it?
Which brings us to Section 3, Mu's weather control technology.
The text draws a really fascinating comparison here to show just how far ahead Mu was, even compared to other mythical advanced societies like Atlantis. The source claims that Atlantis, for all its supposed glory, had a major limitation. Their flying machines could only operate on nice sunny days. They were totally at the mercy of the weather. But Mu was entirely different. On a cloudy or rainy day, Mu's aircraft didn't stay grounded. They simply flew up above the rain clouds to reach the pure sunlight in the upper atmosphere. They literally conquered the weather.
Just imagine the engineering required for these massive whale-shaped airships navigating the ancient skies. The text describes them deploying these balloon-like mechanisms to lift themselves up, pulling pure solar rays from high above the storm clouds, completely bypassing the bad weather down below. So they weren't just flying, they were actively mining sunlight right out of the sky.
And the crucial takeaway here is that they didn't just avoid bad weather. They allegedly controlled the whole shebang. The source text details some unbelievable capabilities.
Mu's scientists could supposedly create artificial clouds at will. They could actively control the weather to ensure massive agricultural success, totally preventing the kinds of famines that plagued humanity for millennia afterward. They could induce rain for irrigation, and remarkably, they could even intentionally call down lightning strikes to harvest the electrical discharge as an extra energy source. Absolute atmospheric mastery.
Let's scale things up even further in Section 4, Satellites and Space Technology.
The source material is completely unambiguous about this, explicitly stating that they were, and I quote, covering the world beyond the stratosphere, using heat-resistant materials just like modern satellites. I mean, this isn't some vague poetic metaphor about the stars. This is highly specific aerospace terminology describing a civilization from 17,000 years ago.
According to the text, the engineers of Mu placed specialized, streamlined structures straight into orbit. And think about the logic here. If your entire civilization runs on pure sunlight, the Earth's atmosphere itself is a barrier that diffuses that light, right? So they supposedly built these satellite equivalents that set out beyond the stratosphere to capture solar radiation at its absolute maximum potency before it even touched the atmosphere. This orbital infrastructure was basically the ultimate pinnacle of their pyramid power grid.
Finally, Section 5, a question for modern civilization.
The defining characteristic of Mu's mythical engineering wasn't just raw power, it was this absolute harmony with nature. They didn't dig into the earth to burn it, they passively caught the light of the sun. Our modern world, on the flip side, is largely defined by extraction and destruction, burning fossil fuels that pollute the exact same atmosphere Mu supposedly sought to balance. Furthermore, Mu's technology was supposedly driven by a desire for planetary survival, controlling weather to ensure everyone had food and preventing famine. It paints a picture of technology working completely in service of ecological harmony.
Which leaves us with a really provocative question to wrap up on today. Based on the claims in these texts, if true progress actually means living in complete harmony with natural energy without destroying our own habitat to power our cities, how advanced is our modern world really? It kind of forces us to ask if we're actually the masters of technology or just its mechanics, completely missing the grander, harmonious design that a civilization 17,000 years ago might have already perfected. Definitely something to think about the next time you flip on a light switch. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.
So what if you just weren't bound by your physical body? Imagine for a second a society where having physical flesh is, well, entirely optional. What if the basic limits of our biology, being born, growing old, being stuck in one location, were really just constraints that certain beings could totally bypass? It sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what we're diving into today as we challenge our most basic understanding of what it means to be human.
Today, we're unpacking the highly esoteric spiritual taxonomy described in Chapter 7 of The True Heart of Lamu. Specifically, we'll be exploring the wildly diverse forms of life that allegedly existed during the legendary Mu civilization. This was a place where the physical and spiritual realms weren't separate at all. They were seamlessly intertwined.
All right, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, the hybrid spirit-earth civilization. Second, the highest priesthood class. Third, free-shifting phantom-type humans. Fourth, miraculous angel humans. And finally, spiritual earth guidance. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Hybrid Spirit-Earth Civilization. To really wrap our heads around these concepts, we have to understand their foundational worldview. According to the spiritual readings recorded in the text, Mu wasn't just your standard ancient empire made of stone and agriculture. It's described as this highly advanced, hybrid society. The beings there supposedly navigated freely between the physical world and the spirit world, totally unbound by the barriers that we just take for granted every single day.
Now, the text makes a really fascinating claim here. It says the earthly realm is merely a foothold. Think about that for a second. For these advanced spiritual beings, Earth was literally never meant to be a permanent physical home. It was just a temporary base, a foothold, if you will, used specifically to guide the development of the material world and ordinary humanity.
Section 2. Highest priesthood class. So in a society that values the spiritual way over the physical, the power structure looks completely different from what we're used to. At the absolute highest echelon, totally separated from everyone else, was the priesthood. While the general lower-class population just handled purely physical labor without any access to higher spiritual knowledge, the priesthood operated on an entirely different plane of reality and responsibility.
And here's the crucial point. This ruling class wasn't managing city infrastructure or earthly politics. No, they were actively engineering the spiritual dimensions of Earth. They cooperated to reform the spirit world itself, working off this core belief that understanding the universe's secrets was the exact same thing as knowing Earth's secrets. And their ultimate end goal? Literally elevating themselves to become gods.
Section 3. Free-shifting phantom-type humans.
This brings us to the real core of Chapter 7. The text introduces us to what it calls phantom-type humans, or phantom gata jinrui in the original Japanese. Basically, these were highly advanced spirit-based entities. They were kind of ghost-like, but not totally incorporeal. They actually had this incredible ability to manifest physical flesh, almost like throwing on a suit of armor, but only when they specifically needed to interact with the material world. The stark contrast between these two states really hits the nail on the head. Look at modern humans. We are completely tethered to our biological flesh from the second we're born until the day we die, right? But for these phantom-type citizens of Mu, their default existence was spirit-based. Having a physical body was totally temporary, highly conditional, and honestly just optional.
Now you might be wondering, okay, how exactly does a spirit actually touch a physical object? Well, the text explains this through a mechanism it calls quantum transformation.
By utilizing this quantum transformation, the book claims that these phantom types could intentionally lower their spiritual frequency to perfectly match the material world. And when they dropped that frequency, they were perfectly capable of eating earthly food, drinking, and physically touching objects, temporarily becoming completely indistinguishable from ordinary physical humans. Pretty wild, right? It goes even deeper. The source actually ties these specific beings to major cross-cultural legends. Because they were essentially spirit-based, the text suggests their abilities perfectly explain phenomena like doppelgangers, when a person allegedly appears in multiple physical locations at once. It also notes they were perfectly capable of journeying to other planets. The book even flat out states that these entities are the exact same beings that later generations would remember as the demigods of ancient Greek mythology.
Section 4. Miraculous angel humans.
Next up, we have angel humans, a category that completely shatters pretty much every rule of mammalian biology and life cycles as we know them.
According to the spiritual messages recorded in the text, these angel humans defied all biological logic because they were born directly into the physical world as fully formed adults. Yeah, you heard that right. Absolutely zero childhood development required. The text explicitly compares this phenomenal bypassing of normal reproduction straight to legendary tales of virgin births. They just arrived on the scene, completely mature and ready to enact their spiritual duties.
Section 5. Spiritual Earth Guidance.
So, why did these incredibly powerful beings even bother interacting with the physical Earth at all? Well, to them, physical biology was just completely malleable. Because they saw DNA as nothing more than an interchangeable blueprint, the text claims some of these beings could literally shapeshift into animals. It compares this directly to natural camouflage, like how chameleons or octopuses change their appearance, just done on a profound conscious genetic level. The text even drops this mind-bending detail. In extreme cases, some of these beings consumed anima, meaning raw spiritual energy or souls. It's a radically different hierarchy of life.
When we look at this entire taxonomy, we're seeing a highly stratified society in action. You've got the lower class handling the physical labor at the bottom. Above them, the shifting phantom types and miraculous angel types using the earth purely as a foothold. And right at the top, the elite priesthood, orchestrating the planet's actual evolution, aiming for ultimate godhood. This was a civilization operating from the top down, where your spiritual capability literally dictated your reality.
I think this quote from the text perfectly sums up their radical perspective. DNA is just a blueprint. If you swap the blueprint, you can transform. For the elite of Mu, biology definitely wasn't destiny. The physical body was totally subservient to their spiritual will.
Which brings us to our final thought. Remember, the text presents these concepts not as fairy tales, but as actual history. It forces us to stop and ask, are the universal mythologies we've all grown up with, the tales of Greek demigods, miraculous adult births, spooky doppelgangers, and animal shapeshifters, are they actually just fragmented, ancient memories of this bizarre, hybrid civilization described in the texts of Mu? It's a massive paradigm shift, and it definitely makes you look at human mythology in a completely different light. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.
Welcome back, focused learners, to another deep dive. Today, we're unpacking something truly massive, like cosmic framework massive. we're doing a completely neutral, step-by-step explainer on Chapter 8 of Ryuho Okawa's text about Lamu. The chapter is literally called The Secret of Human Creation, and let me tell you, it lays out this incredible, multi-layered mythology about how souls are created, tested, and evolved all across the universe. It's essentially a giant architectural blueprint for spiritual evolution. So let's break this down so you can see exactly what this text is proposing.
Okay, so right off the bat, let's ground ourselves in the source material. We're looking at The True Heart of Lamu by Ryuho Okawa. And just a quick reminder, for the purposes of this explainer, we're staying completely impartial, right? We're not here to debate the religious tenets. We're just here to explore the sheer scale of this narrative. Because according to the book, the figure of Lamu is being channeled to reveal this hidden history. And it goes way, way beyond early human history. We're talking cosmic, metaphysical levels, mapping out how an unseen world supposedly runs our physical one. Here's our roadmap for making sense of all these concepts. First, Lamu as creator. Then, the birth of life. Next, molds and reincarnation. After that, interplanetary soul transfers. And finally, humanity's infinite potential.
All right, Section 1, Lamu as creator, the cosmic keymaster.
You know, usually when we hear about ancient kings, they're just historical rulers of lost continents, right? But this text does something totally different. It positions Lamu as a spiritual creator who actually governs Earth's development. And they introduce this really fascinating term for him, the keymaster. So what exactly is a keymaster? Well, in this context, it's an entity who basically holds the access codes to the cosmos. By using this spiritual key, they can literally open doors between different dimensions and even different planets. The text mentions that while this entity has lived on other planets before, his current gig, his main responsibility right now, is managing the spiritual evolution and all the ongoing experiments right here on Earth.
Moving on to Section 2, the birth of life, solar energy and vessels.
So now that we know who's in charge, how does the text actually explain life physically starting on Earth? Well, it brilliantly blends spiritual intention with physical biology. According to the book, the absolute foundation of biological life is solar energy. Step 1, plants capture that raw sunlight. Step 2, they convert it. And the source uses these really specific terms, calling this converted energy gasoline or coal. Then, step 3, animals come along, eat those plants, and essentially consume that organic gasoline to build up their vitality and their physical bodies. It's the biological food chain we all know, sure, but framed here as a deliberate mechanism designed by the creator to fuel the physical energy needed for spiritual vessels.
Okay, Section 3, molds and reincarnation. Let's look at the evolution of the soul.
So, to make the huge jump from basic animal vitality to complex human consciousness, this mythology introduces a really specific mechanism. It's an esoteric concept called the human mold, or egata in the original Japanese. The text argues that as spiritual energy inhabited animal forms, those forms started to evolve. Over a long period of time, as that animal-based energy developed, these human molds were created. And once you have these physical and spiritual templates set up, boom, you can start creating brand new souls that originate directly from Earth. It's basically this evolutionary pipeline where biological life is upgraded into vessels that can actually hold higher human consciousness. And when it comes to explaining how these souls actually experience reincarnation, the text uses this incredibly vivid metaphor. Just listen to this. When you pull up a sweet potato or a potato, there are many attached. What hangs down is one person, but to those who understand the whole, it is the majority. Think about that visual for a second. A single human lifetime, like you right now, is described as just one potato hanging off this massive, hidden root system. To you, you're just one person. But the true overarching soul is the entire vine underneath the surface, made up of a majority of these completely distinct life experiences. So the really crucial point here is how that potato vine is actually grown. The text breaks down the earthly reincarnation cycle as this highly deliberate process of gathering diverse experiences. A single energy body might spend roughly 2,000 years in reincarnation, and during that massive span of time, the soul alternates, being born male, then female, experiencing life with extreme privilege as nobility, and then coming back as a struggling commoner. The entire goal is to force the soul to see the world from literally every possible angle, building up this incredibly diverse, multifaceted collective soul. It's basically a super intensive 2,000-year empathy training program. But it's not all just upward progress. The source material neutrally points out the harsher realities of the creator's management style, detailing what it calls soul destruction experiments. According to Lamu, evolution naturally involves trial, error, and, yeah, sometimes regression. So when creations failed to evolve or adapt the way they were supposed to, the creator would essentially scrap them. The text actually uses a phrase that translates to discarding them in bulk, literally terminating entire evolutionary branches just to keep the overall experiment moving forward.
That brings us to Section 4, Interplanetary Soul Transfers, Cosmic Reincarnation. Up until now, we've only been talking about the microscale, right? Earthly rebirth. But the text aggressively expands this mythology to a macro, cosmic scale, introducing interplanetary reincarnation. And this isn't just about sending Earth souls away. It's actually about Earth accepting souls from completely different planets so they can join in on this grand evolutionary experiment. It envisions Earth as this giant cosmic melting pot, taking in extraterrestrial souls and training them right alongside the ones that were born here. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sharp contrast the text draws between these two types of reincarnation. Earthly reincarnation, like we just talked about, is all about social and empathetic evolution, changing your gender, your wealth, your status, but always within the exact same world. Interplanetary reincarnation, on the other hand, is about radical physical adaptation. The text notes that if you move a soul to a completely new planet, you have to create a body that suits that alien environment. The physical shape of the being has to fundamentally change just to survive the new conditions. So we're talking about evolution on a galactic scale, all overseen by the same keymaster.
And finally, Section 5, Humanity's Infinite Potential, Expanding Awareness.
So having laid out this massive cosmic architecture, from plants turning sunlight into gasoline, all the way to Earth accepting souls from across the galaxy, the text brings it all home with a philosophical thesis about our future. Lamu gives this core warning to modern humanity. Human potential is infinite, but as long as you do not elevate your power of recognition beyond what you can currently imagine, there is no development. Basically, the source is arguing that we are operating at a tiny fraction of our true capability. Our evolution is directly tied to this power of recognition, our ability to comprehend a reality that's way bigger than our immediate physical world. If we stay locked into narrow, earthly perspectives, our spiritual progress is just going to stall out entirely.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on today. Based on this massive mythos we just explored, if our earthly lives are really just single nodes, just single potatoes on a cosmic vine stretching across planets and dimensions, what hidden reality are we currently failing to imagine next? It's a compelling question, and it completely challenges the limits of human awareness, which is exactly what the source material is trying to do. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Chapter 8. And hey, keep expanding that power of recognition.
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly, a deeply cautionary tale today. We're going to examine a text that claims to channel the legendary history of the Mu civilization. You know, the society said to have completely vanished beneath the waves millennia ago. But look, we aren't just hashing out ancient myths here. We're zeroing in on Chapter 9 of this text today, which deliberately pivots from the ancient past to deliver some pretty profound warnings for our modern world. So, get comfortable and let's just dive right into this.
Right off the bat, our source text sets the stage by claiming to reveal the true heart of Ra-Mu, the great king of Mu. According to this narrative, Mu was a highly advanced civilization that thrived roughly 17,000 years ago. Just wrap your head around that timeline for a second. But the core premise of the book is that Mu wasn't just technologically advanced. It was a society where profound spiritual mystery and high-level science were completely fused together. I mean, they existed in total, absolute harmony.
Which brings us to the central, kind of haunting question of our explainer today. If Mu was at the absolute peak of both technological and spiritual development, how did it just completely vanish? The source material argues that a society doesn't just sink into the ocean by pure chance. Instead, the text asks us to consider, can a highly advanced civilization literally destroy itself from the inside out? Because to understand how they fell, we first have to understand exactly how they lived.
Let's look at Section 1. The Mystery of Mu and its Golden Age of Harmony. Okay, so to grasp the Golden Age of Mu, the text introduces a really unique concept that's central to the whole narrative. It calls it the membrane. According to the source, during Mu's early era, the barrier, or this membrane, between the physical, everyday world and the spiritual realm was incredibly thin. It was almost transparent. Because of this,
The people of Mu possessed a totally natural, effortless spiritual connection. They understood the divine implicitly, and they used their advanced technology in complete harmony with those spiritual truths. But as we're going to see, a thin membrane requires faith to maintain it.
And that brings us right to our second section: science, power, and desire, the turning point.
The source details a fatal shift that purportedly took place. Mu's early era, defined by that spiritual harmony and the thin membrane we just talked about, well, it was eventually replaced by a dark mirror of itself in its final days. That beautiful harmony gave way to extreme materialism. The population developed this relentless lust for power. And the very science that once worked alongside spirituality, it was hijacked to create weapons of mass destruction. It is a classic, absolutely devastating turning point.
Let's look at the exact words from the source here. In a specific dialogue channeled in the text, the voice of Ramu explains exactly how this happened. He notes that as people began to fight more, the foundational faith of the society began to thin out. And as that faith faded away, all those spiritual elements were slowly replaced by worldly, material obsessions. Science stopped being a tool for universal good. Instead, it became a tool to satisfy what the text specifically calls desire and the lust for power.
The crucial point is captured perfectly in this assertion from the text. Science became a tool to serve desire and the lust for power, leading to mass destruction weapons that strangled them. The source is incredibly specific here, guys. The downfall of Mu wasn't just some random natural disaster. It was a direct consequence of their own arrogance. People began to use science to enslave others. They developed terrifying weapons, akin to what we'd call nuclear arms today. And ultimately, their greed and reliance on these destructive technologies literally strangled their civilization. They quite literally engineered their own demise.
This leads us right into the most pivotal part of the text and our third section: warnings for modern civilization, the mirror. So remember that concept of the membrane we discussed earlier? Well, in Chapter 9, the text turns the mirror directly onto us today. The entity of Ramu claims that our modern society is repeating the exact same metaphysical mistake, because our modern world lacks belief that once thin membrane between the physical and spiritual worlds has thickened. It's basically become a brick wall. It is opaque. According to the text, we can no longer see through it, which means we have completely cut ourselves off from spiritual truths, making our society incredibly vulnerable.
The source outlines several very specific, pointed critiques of our modern era. Let's walk through these warnings because they're intense. First, it points out that today we view science and spirituality as inherently contradictory rather than complementary like they were in early Mu. Second, our over-reliance on materialism is actively blinding humanity to greater truths. Third, and honestly, quite ominously, the text suggests that our current century is rapidly reaching a dead end. And finally, it introduces this fascinating philosophical argument that the sin of having no faith is actually a greater danger to human survival than ordinary worldly crimes. Why? Because a lack of faith corrupts the entire trajectory of a civilization.
As things look increasingly bleak, the text shifts gears. Let's look at Section 4, Cataclysms and the Savior, the Prophecy.
The narrative here builds to a major prophetic climax. The text channels a strong sense of impending crisis. It suggests that our current civilization's path is entirely unsustainable. There's an explicit mention that we are hitting a wall, and that great earth changes, massive global cataclysms, are actually on the horizon because of the imbalance we've created. But it's not entirely doom and gloom. The text introduces the concept of a savior arriving right amidst all this chaos.
Let's define exactly how the source views this event, though. According to the text, a savior doesn't just arrive when everything is fine and peaceful. No, saviors are inextricably linked to periods of massive, devastating global disasters. The arrival of a spiritual savior and an era of great cataclysms are literally two sides of the exact same coin. The crisis is what triggers the intervention. It's a really striking cosmic mechanic presented by the author.
So, what are we actually supposed to do with all of this? That brings us to Section 5. The law of cause and effect. The takeaway.
Beneath all the dramatic talk of sinking continents, advanced ancient weapons, and impending global cataclysms, the source grounds its entire argument in what it calls the fundamental law of cause and effect. The destruction of Mu wasn't random, and any future crisis we face won't be random either. Actions have consequences. A civilization that abandons harmony for unchecked desire creates the precise conditions for its own destruction. It's just an inescapable law of the universe, according to these teachings.
But the text does offer a philosophical solution. It claims that this world is temporary. When the true self awakens, true freedom appears.
The ultimate takeaway from the tragedy of Manu is to break free from this obsession with materialism. By recognizing that the physical world is really just a temporary stage, and by awakening to a deeper spiritual reality, or the true self as they call it, a society can theoretically step off that destructive path and find actual, lasting freedom.
We've explored the Golden Age, the tragic fall of Mu, and the profound warnings from Chapter 9 that the source text lays out for us today. The parallels the book draws between the reliance on science and power and our own modern trajectory are absolutely thought-provoking. Which leaves us with one final, kind of haunting question to reflect on. If history truly does repeat itself, as the law of cause and effect suggests, what future is our modern society currently writing? Think about that as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into our next topic with you. Keep learning.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really, truly fascinating shift that happened right at the very end of a profound spiritual session. We're looking closely at the reflections from Chapter 10 of Ramu's True Heart. It's a journey that, well, starts with a lot of tension and strictness, but ultimately reveals this deeply moving message about our own spiritual growth. So, get ready, because we're going to break down exactly how a highly demanding spiritual message turned into a massive moment of profound gratitude.
Let's dive right into this paradox. Imagine you're attending a monumental spiritual seance. You're probably expecting enlightenment, comfort, maybe even some grand cosmic secrets, right? But instead, the entity arrives and seems, well, displeased. Why on earth would a revered, supreme spiritual being enter a session in a bad mood? It kind of goes against everything we typically expect from divine guidance, doesn't it? But this is exactly the situation Master Ryuho Okawa and the questioners found themselves in.
Now, to really understand the shock in the room, we've got to look at exactly who we're dealing with here. When we look at the Cantare soul branch diagram, it establishes Ramu's immense, and I mean immense, spiritual stature. He's actually mapped out as a direct branch of the Supreme Being, Cantare. So we aren't just talking about some minor spirit. We are talking about a creator-level entity who actually guided humanity during the ancient Mu civilization. Understanding this massive scale makes his initial foul mood all the more shocking to everyone sitting in that room.
Section 1. The 777th Milestone. A Displeased Arrival.
To really grasp this, we need the context. You see, this wasn't just any regular session. This was actually recorded as the historic 777th public spiritual message. You'd think a milestone like that would be pure celebration, right? Yet the atmosphere was just incredibly thick with dramatic tension right from the moment Ramu's consciousness was channeled. At the conclusion of the session, as recorded in Chapter 10, Master Ryuho Okawa claps his hands 3 times to formally end the channeling. But the moment the connection is closed, the room doesn't erupt into cheers. Instead, there's this immediate, heavy period of reflection. Master Okawa's very first observation to the questioners is actually about Ramu's intensely difficult demeanor during the message. In fact, Master Okawa noted a stark reality right away. He observed, and I quote, "He entered in a somewhat displeased state. A difficult being like this has no reason to offer service to us." The absolutely crucial point here is that a being of Ramu's exalted, creator-like level simply doesn't exist to pander to humanity. I mean, he isn't a customer service rep for the universe. He doesn't just hand out easy answers or tell people what they want to hear just to make them feel good. And this highlights a massive clash of expectations. The questioners clearly arrived hoping for, easy-to-digest spiritual comfort, maybe some straightforward historical trivia about the lost continent of Mu, but the reality? Ramu delivered challenging demands for true faith, pointed out their blatant lack of understanding, and practically forced them into deep self-reflection. It was a huge reality check. Section 2. Understanding the tough love. So why the strictness? Well, if we peel back the layers of this session, we start to see that Ramu's refusal to pander wasn't just arbitrary anger. Actually, it was a very specific, highly calculated form of tough love, designed to wake the questioners up. The strictness had some really clear triggers. First off, the questioners themselves realized their own level of spiritual recognition was just too low to grasp what they were engaging with. Second, there was a distinct lack of profound faith. It's like they were trying to measure a cosmic being using their own limited earthly rulers. And finally, Ramu was demanding that they purify their minds and look inward, rather than just firing off superficial questions. They were basically treating a divine encounter like a casual interview, and that just wasn't going to fly. You can literally see the realization hit them right in the transcript. One of the questioners actually explicitly says, "I am truly sorry. I am only just now beginning to understand." This right here is the turning point of our explainer today, the exact moment they realized that their own shallow assumptions and spiritual immaturity were the actual reasons for Ramu's strictness. Their entire posture completely changes from defensive to deeply apologetic. They finally truly grasp the gravity of the room they're in.
And before he departed, Ramu offered a definitive, uncompromising teaching. He basically explained that if humanity's understanding is simply too limited to intellectually grasp these infinite, cosmic spiritual truths, well, then the only path forward is faith. You just can't demand proof for things your mind isn't evolved enough to contain yet. True faith, he explains, is what bridges that massive gap between human limitation and a divine reality.
Section 3. The Payoff. Revealing the True Heart. Now for the incredible payoff of this session, because behind all that strictness lay an incredibly deep love. This apparent anger, it was actually a profound expression of divine care. Rishi Mahita didn't scold them because he hated them, he scolded them because he wanted to push humanity to elevate its understanding of God's true will. It's really the ultimate tough love of a parent who knows their child is capable of so much more.
Let's wrap things up with these final reflections. Master Okawa notes that despite coming in displeased, Ramu did eventually offer them some incredible insights once their attitude shifted. The questioners fully admitted their initial assumptions were shallow, and most importantly, the entire vibe of the room totally transformed. The tension completely evaporated, and it was replaced by a profound, deep gratitude from everyone present for being given this strict but absolutely necessary cosmic perspective.
Which leaves us with this to think about. We all say we want guidance and truth, right? But how would you respond if divine guidance arrived at your doorstep, not as a comforting pat on the back, but as a strict, uncompromising demand to elevate your own understanding and faith? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the hardest truths to hear are the ones delivered with the absolute deepest love. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep reflecting on that.